The confrontation began with a measuring tape under the bright afternoon sun. HOA officer Bradley Knox stood at the edge of Ethan Cole's driveway, stretching the yellow tape across a narrow strip of freshly planted flowers. His jaw was tight, his voice sharper than necessary, and the accusation he delivered carried more weight than the small patch of soil ever could. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening. Ethan hadn't expected his Saturday to unravel like this. He had spent the morning planting marigolds along the border of his driveway, a small tradition his late mother used to cherish every spring. The soil still clung to his fingernails when Bradley announced that the flower bed extended 3 inches beyond community property guidelines. 3 inches, Ethan almost laughed. But Bradley wasn't joking. It's a violation, Bradley said, scribbling onto his clipboard. Encroachment on shared visual alignment. Ethan blinked. They're flowers, that's not the point. And in that moment, Ethan understood this wasn't about flowers. Maple Ridge Estates was a community known for its perfect symmetry, identical mailboxes, evenly spaced hedges, fences painted in precisely approved shades of beige. Ethan had moved there 2 years ago after his mother passed away. He had wanted quiet, order, a place to rebuild, but he was learning that order, when taken too far, can become rigid and unyielding. Bradley stepped closer, lowering his voice. You've had prior warnings, lawn height, trash bin placement. Now this. The words were technically true. Ethan had once forgotten to bring his bin in before sunset. He had let his grass grow a little longer during a rough week at work. Small things, human things. He felt heat rise in his chest. It wasn't anger, not exactly, it was more like humiliation. The feeling of being spoken to like a child on his own property. Across the street, a curtain shifted. A neighbor paused mid-walk with her dog. The stillness of the afternoon sharpened, becoming heavy with unspoken judgment. You'll need to remove it by tomorrow, Bradley continued, his voice leaving no room for discussion or fines. Will escalate, Ethan's mind raced. He imagined digging the flowers back up, leaving the soil bare again. He imagined surrendering just to keep the peace. But then he remembered kneeling beside his mother as she pressed seeds into the dirt, her hands patient and steady. Grow something, she used to say, even in small spaces. Suddenly those 3 inches felt much larger than they sounded. He reached into his pocket and took out his phone. Bradley's eyes narrowed instantly. You recording me? Yes, Ethan said calmly. Something subtle shifted in the air. Bradley straightened his posture, his tone recalibrating but still edged with authority. You don't need to escalate this. I'm not, Ethan replied, his voice steady. I'm documenting. His heart was pounding harder than he let on. Conflict wasn't natural to him. He was an accountant by trade, organized, conflict averse, detail oriented, but standing quietly didn't mean he was weak. Bradley stepped forward again, trying to assert his dominance. You're interfering with enforcement. Ethan inhaled slowly. He felt the weight of eyes watching from windows. He felt the temptation to shrink, to apologize, to make the problem go away, but shrinking had never made problems smaller. I'm asking for the specific clause that says 3 inches of flowers are harmful, Ethan said evenly. The silence that followed stretched on. Bradley flipped through his binder, the pages rustling louder than necessary in the quiet street. The clause existed, but it was vaguely worded, uniform property lines, it read. It was entirely open to interpretation. Does it define harm? Ethan asked gently. Bradley hesitated, and in that single moment of hesitation, something important happened. The power dynamic wavered, not through shouting, not through defiance, but through calm, unwavering persistence. A neighbor stepped off her porch. They're beautiful flowers, she called out softly. Another voice chimed in from across the way. My yard line's not exact either. The atmosphere shifted from an isolated confrontation to a moment of quiet solidarity. Bradley's composure thinned. For a moment, his frustration looked less like authority and more like insecurity. He wasn't a villain. He was just a man clinging tightly to rules because rules were the only thing that made his role feel certain. Ethan saw that. He could have pressed harder, he could have mocked or accused him. Instead, he lowered his phone slightly but kept recording. I respect community standards, he said, but standards should serve people, not erase them. The words hung in the air between them. Bradley closed the binder slowly. The measuring tape retracted with a soft final snap. I'll review this with the board, he muttered. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't a victory speech, but it was a retreat. As Bradley walked back toward his vehicle, the tension drained from the street. Neighbors resumed their movements. Curtains opened fully now, no longer hiding curiosity. Ethan stood alone beside his marigolds, his hands trembling faintly now that the adrenaline was fading. He hadn't planned to challenge anything, he had only wanted to plant something that reminded him of home. That evening he attended the HOA meeting, something he had never done before. With quiet composure, he presented the situation, not as a complaint, but as a question about flexibility and humanity within the guidelines. To his surprise, several residents supported him. The board voted to clarify the property alignment rules and allow for minor aesthetic variations within reasonable limits. The flowers stayed. Weeks later, Maple Ridge looked slightly different. A wind chime here, a painted mailbox there, nothing chaotic, just subtle touches of individuality where there had once been strict, unbending sameness. Ethan often sat on his porch at dusk, watching the sunlight settle over his marigolds. He realized that standing his ground hadn't been about rebellion, it had been about dignity, because true power isn't proven by how loudly it demands obedience, it is revealed by how calmly it listens, and sometimes real growth begins exactly 3 inches beyond the line someone else tried to draw for you. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to Cinematic Whispers, where quiet courage always has a voice.